Hello, my darlings. This is Micah Riots, here with another episode of Ink Medicine. My guest today is Hannah Wolf. Hannah, will you please introduce yourself? Your pronouns, where did you grow up in what era, and your Enneagram number, and your favorite thing to drink.
My name is Hannah Wolf. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them. I am originally from Santa Fe, New Mexico. I started tattooing in 2003, and I've been in the Bay Area tattooing since 2011, and I have no idea what my Enneagram number is.
That's great. What's your favorite thing to drink?
Tea.
What kind of tea?
Chai tea.
Do you get like fancy with your tea? Do you like go sourcing the best chai tea you can find, or do you just like get the regular?
Sometimes I like to try different chai teas. I like to go to coffee shops and get chai teas. I also make my own tea. I have a camellia tree and a jasmine bush tree thing, and I make green tea out of my camellia tree, and I can do green tea jasmine when it's blooming in the summertime. And I like to do like fresh herbs that I dry. Sometimes add those to the tea, like rosemary.
That's awesome. When if I ask people if they get fancy with their tea, they usually, it's usually like, well, yeah, I find the organic loose leaf tea. And you're like, I grow the organic loose leaf tea and then I make my tea.
Yeah. Very I also impressive. Like to forage around Mount Diablo for different things, like different like edible herbs and plants. And sometimes I bring those back for like either just eating or like dehydrating and using as seasoning or teas. But yeah, I feel that like teas are really healing, and things are most healing when you like find them in nature.
Mm-hmm. Especially locally. I feel like that is especially good for us.
Mm-hmm. Get that nice like acid rain.
Okay, well, tell me, so you're a tattoo artist. You've been tattooing a long time. How long?
Next month will be 20 years.
Fuck, yeah.
Yeah.
How old are you?
I am 36. I started tattooing when I was 16 years old.
How did that happen? How did you start tattooing?
I started designing tattoos for friends when I was a teenager. And when my friends were turning 18, they started taking my designs to the local tattoo shop. And then I had a fake ID, so I went in there to get some designs priced out that I had drawn, as well as, drawn for some friends, for myself and others. And the owner basically just looked at my sketchbook and asked me if I'd ever thought of being a tattoo artist. Yeah, and then...
And did you ever think about it before then?
Sure. I mean, I was designing tattoos for friends, and when I was a kid, my mom took me with her to get a tattoo. Both my parents went to art school, so I always had like a periphery understanding that like tattooing was an option. But also in like the late 90s, early 2000s, it was kind of like a little insidious. Like it was a little counterculture on like the side of unsavory characters. Mm-hmm. Even though I grew up in a pretty artsy town, I grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So there were definitely like tattoo shops where people were like artists doing art, but the tattoo shop we went to was kind of a little bit more on the seedy side. So yeah, I didn't know if that's what I wanted to be. I was so young that it was kind of hard to like nail anything down. So I started apprenticing there, and naturally the guy that owned the shop was like kind of a creep. Mm-hmm. And as a lot of men in the tattoo industry were kind of in that era, unfortunately, he was kind of a predator. So I only worked for him for 6 months. And then I left to go do some other things and went back to school, but people kept bugging me to tattoo them. So in 2006, I ended up getting like more of a real apprenticeship in Las Vegas when I moved out there. And I've been tattooing full-time since then.
So in the 6 months you were in that first apprenticeship with the creepy dude, did you actually get to tattoo, or were you still just sort of watching?
No, I started tattooing. So from that time, for like about 3 years, I just kind of did small, terrible tattoos out of the house because that's about all that I had learned how to do at that first apprenticeship. So I dabbled. People kept bothering me to tattoo them, so I kept trying. But it wasn't what I wanted to do, but like all the paths in my life just kept leading back to it. So
what did you want to do instead?
Well, I come from a family of college-educated people, so I identify my privilege there. My parents, like I said, went to art school. They wanted better for me. They wanted me to be like an architect or an attorney or, you know, somebody with like a graduate degree that had a real job. They didn't want me to be an artist, so they kind of pushed me in the other direction.
Were they working artists? Because since you said they went to art school. No, my mom was a bookkeeper. My dad was a construction worker, so they were pretty blue collar. Mm-hmm. How did you end up in Vegas?
Oh, my college roommate's dad lived out there and invited us to come and live with him and work for his real estate company. So that sounded way better than going to UNM in Albuquerque.
Did you do some real estate? Did you work in real estate?
Yes, I did. I was a licensed mortgage loan officer for about 6 months before I transitioned into tattooing full time. And then we worked for the real estate company, and I was in the process of getting my real estate license, but I didn't end up finishing it because I just went back to tattooing.
Mm-hmm. Tattooing was better, huh? than real estate.
Sounded like a lot more fun.
Yeah. Kind of different thing. Yeah. I mean, it seems like in real estate, you're also doing a different thing every day, but in a different way.
In a different way. Yeah. And as a 19-year-old, being a tattoo artist just seemed a lot more interesting. And it was also about the time that, like, you know, we were dealing with, like, a market collapse, like 2006, 2007, like running into the 2008 like total market collapse. So it was a big economy slowdown. So even though the housing market was still going in that era, it had slowed down quite a bit in Las Vegas. So I kind of missed the boom. So I was like doing a lot of work without like a lot of progress. So I was doing like mortgage loan processing. And as a 19-year-old, I was having a difficult time finding clients, obviously. I didn't really like know a lot of people that were buying houses. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was just, I don't know, it just kind of wasn't for me. I've always been a proponent of like, you listen to where the universe wants to take you and choose a path of least resistance, because whatever powers that be out there, I'm definitely an atheist, but like whatever energy forces that are connecting humans to the living world, they're showing you things, whether it's like ancestors or just like whatever your path is, genetics, whatever. There are certain things in life that you can fight or you can just give into. And for me, I think when I stopped fighting becoming an artist and a tattooer in that path, things just got a little bit easier for me. It seemed like that was where I was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. It felt right to you. How was this next shop in Vegas? Was it more friendly, less creepy?
No, tattooing in the early 2000s was really rough as a young woman. I didn't really work in tattoo shops with more than one female tattooer at a time, unless it was like me and, well, yeah, it would be like me and one other female tattooer at the most. And I didn't work with more than one other woman until I lived in the Bay. Most shops I've worked at in my career have been all men and then me. And I feel like it's changing a lot. And I don't know if it's just because I'm a female tattoo shop owner that other women tend to gravitate toward me. But ever since I've been in the Bay Area, I've had like a lot more female and queer and like different energy kind of like coming into the industry and surrounding me in the industry. Whereas most of my career was like this very cis, hyper masculine environment where I'd get treated like, oh, you're pretty good, and then comma, for a girl, or or like, whose dick did you suck to get into the industry, or like, you know, it's like I would go to conventions and try to fraternize with people, and like the men would completely ignore me because they just figured that I was there to like try to like find a husband or boyfriend or something, rather than actually try to like find connections in the industry. Like to like advance my own career. So yeah, it's been kind of a rough go at it, and I'm really happy that things are changing, and I'm happy that I've put the work in to make it a more accommodating industry for different people coming into the industry.
Yeah, you really have. I remember, I started at Black and Blue in 2008, and a couple years into it, I was on a date with this woman, this butch woman who had a bunch of tattoos, and on that first date, she basically let me know that everybody else in the city of San Francisco were like, oh yeah, that's cute, those little girls at Black and Blue, like they do cute little tattoos, and I was like, okay, like we're on a date, okay, this is weird. You're telling me that, you have male tattoo artists that you go to tell you that, we suck, essentially.
Yeah.
Because we're a little collective, little girls who do cute little tattoos.
When I started tattooing, there was another young woman at the shop who was the owner's other former apprentice. And he basically, it's like he wanted to utilize women in tattooing as more of like a sex object as a way to sell tattoos than it was of actually like finding gifted, talented artists. So it kind of just like shortchanged the fact that like both of us were actually like naturally gifted and talented artists who like wanted to be in tattooing for a career. But I'll credit him that like at least he even considered us as women. Mm-hmm. But I do remember back then in like 2003, 2004, I guess it was just 2003, that like people would come in, and I believe that woman's name was Lauren, and Lauren would greet them, and when they found out she was a tattooer, they were like kind of floored, and like when they saw her work, which was like decent and clean, they were always like, oh my god, like I didn't know girls could tattoo. And it just like it kind of like hit me hard, like to like see that, and it frustrated me a lot. And I think even just like being a woman growing up in like the 80s and 90s, like we were confronted with so many like stagnant gender roles about like how women should go to college to get a good job, but also mostly a husband. Like that's where you go to like meet a husband with a good job, and get an education, but like mostly go meet a husband with a good job. I
mean, the only reason you should have an education is in case your husband leaves you for somebody younger, and then you could take care of yourself and your children at that point. Yeah, or at least your children will be smart enough because you're educated that they can then take care of you. I don't know. Your boy children. Like, your boy children. Yeah. So you don't have a college education. You never ended up going to finish college. I didn't finish. No, I didn't see a reason to finish. I was making okay money tattooing. I was having a really good time. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed the party scene quite a bit in my youths. And I didn't see a purpose to finish college because as much as I wanted that certificate and degree, I couldn't rationalize accruing the debt to basically pay somebody else to work for them, mm-hmm. So I don't know. I guess it's just the pirate in me that saw my life as being like more flexible and cash based, and like it's definitely harder being a self-employed artist, but if you make smart choices through your career, like you can have just as good a quality of life as somebody with a graduate degree. So you own a shop with a bunch of artists working, and you also used to own another shop before. So you've been a boss now for a bunch of years. How has it been to have the necessary skills to run a business, like a bigger business, not just yourself, but with other people depending on you to run that business? So the business side is easy. The people side is hard. What's the difference? So the people side is the diplomacy and trying to figure out ways to make everything work with independent contractors, and all the different personalities. And it's like being the captain of a pirate ship, like you have a bunch of scallywags that kind of all want to be in the pirate life. And somehow you have to get them all coordinated to make a ship sail. Mm-hmm. So that's not something that I came naturally to. The business side of it, I did come a little bit more naturally to, because it just kind of was like
administration and paperwork and organization, which seemed really easy to me. So I guess the harder thing for me was just learning how to deal with people, having never had any experience with management before.
How did you do that? How did you get up to that?
Oh, I probably didn't do very well. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that would say that I'm not a good manager.
I mean, no one's ever happy with their boss. That's just,
right.
completely, that's just true, I think, for everybody.
It's hard to be the boss because you're always the villain. And you're always the person that it defaults onto, good or bad. And it's lonely because you can't fraternize with people the way that like your average person can, because there's no camaraderie like against one single person like a shop owner. And I've definitely I worked for people for 10 years before I became a shop owner. And there were definitely times where I had more sympathy for the people I'd worked for in the past. And then there were definitely times where I was really upset and frustrated by how much shop owners had taken advantage of me in the past. Like the 50-50 business model in tattooing is really exploitive.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So there's a lot of exploitive tattoo shops out there. And I've never liked that. That's why I wanted to become a tattoo shop owner, is because I wanted to give people the best life that I possibly could by allowing for them to take home as much as they could and have the best environment provided for them that I could, just like, because that's how I wish that my career had been. But even so, when I think that I'm giving people the best, sometimes they don't feel that way. So
because they don't know the difference. They never worked the way that we did back in the day for 50-50.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of newer people in the industry that like don't understand that like people like me really suffered so that they could have a better industry to work in. Like I spent years of my career working for 50% of what I was making, showing up 5 days a week plus, 40 hours a week plus. And a lot of those days I made no money. A lot of those days I sat at the shop for 8+ hours and did nothing and made $0. And then when I did tattoo, the shop owners took 50%. But, it's like I wanted to tattoo and I wanted to be in this industry so bad that it was worth it for me to just show up and do the thing and stick with it. And these days, it's like these days you'd be out of your mind to like pay somebody 50% and then show up and make $0 for a week for 40 hours of work in a place. But, it was just a different time, but the world is different now. So I think also like being someone who's like a little bit more old school and dealing with like what the industry is now and what the world is now, it's hard for me to like to rationalize like the work ethic, but also be sympathetic to the fact that like people want to have personal lives even early in their career. So yeah, I think just like dealing with like my own diaspora in the tattoo industry, with like other people that like came up in old school tattooing and then like what it is now to be somebody who kind of just starts tattooing and then immediately makes their own schedule and does booth rent. It's like I grapple with that sometimes.
Yeah, it's hard to be like, well, we have to do this thing. You don't understand where you're, how good you have it until you really have to do this thing. And if I'm not going to make you do this thing, how will you ever understand how good you have it?
Right.
So what do you think makes people stay working for you? What's the big difference?
I think it's just vibing, man. Like you just gotta like have just a vibe in the shop with a person. Yeah, like similar senses of humor and like similar taste
in music, maybe.
Yeah, it's like what keeps shops together is the vibes. So it's people who have like similar viewpoints in life and senses of humor and taste that like get together. It's like why people become friends, and I think that's really what makes a tattoo shop work, is that people become friends and then you want to see them every day. So you show up every day. When it becomes like uncomfortable and toxic. And I think a lot of tattooers have been there, where there's like one or two people in a shop and it's like poisoning the well, and they just don't want to be there, and they're really negative, and it just kills the vibe. So
I had somebody pull a knife on me once in my old tattoo shop, like another artist.
Wow.
Yeah. Kind of killed the vibe for a little while, yeah.
Is that when you were like, I'm going to do private studio?
No, I was still apprenticing, so it was...
Oh my gosh.
I couldn't leave because I was halfway through my apprenticeship. But essentially, you know, it was like one of those things where somebody came in, something really simple, some stars, some black stars, something like that I could totally do. And I went to the back and I said, anybody want this walk-in? And nobody, like, specifically asked people. And everybody said, no, I'm busy. I don't want this walk-in. And so I came back out and I said, hey, client, I'm an apprentice, but this is something simple I can totally handle. Here's my work. Like, nobody else is available for you, but I can do it. And then this artist, like, cornered me in the back and was like, don't you ever take the regular shop clients. You're still an apprentice, like, with a knife out. So, yeah, I couldn't really leave. But we ended up having to have different schedules in the shop. So we weren't there on the same days.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's how the industry used to be.
Yeah.
Is like,
this person was pretty old school.
Yeah, it was pretty damn aggressive. And like, being who I am, like, kind of like traversing the industry now, like, I definitely have like that trauma from like old school tattooing, and like I'm trying to like reinvent what tattooing should be, like, kind of moving forward into like, you know, a more like a more intellectual phase of tattooing, rather than like tattooers who feel like they have to burn each other's shops down because they open across the street. Like, if you should be in the industry and you have talent and, you know, like, clientele, another tattoo shop opening nearby isn't a threat, because, you know, if you're confident in your own skill set.
Well, it's also because we've moved away from walk-in culture into online culture. And so, of course, you know, someone walking down the street is not just going to pop in because they already have an appointment for next month.
Right.
If they want a tattoo, you know.
Yeah, I don't feel threatened. I don't feel threatened by like anybody who's going to tattoo like in the immediate area, because I know that I'm confident in my skill set and like the reputation of my business and the people that work with me, that like, it's, you know, it's no thing if there's a bunch of other shops around. Like, they're doing their thing, we're doing our thing. Like, I don't need to talk smack about everybody to like better myself. But you see it so much in the industry where it's like everybody has really nasty things to say about everybody else all the time, and it kind of doesn't matter. Like, ultimate, you know, it's like this weird like toxic masculine culture where they feel like they need to pit women against each other in a workplace, like they're in battle with one another, where it's all just kind of like we're all just trying to go in the same direction. Like, we're not each other's enemies. Yeah,
I kind of wish we had some way to tell each other not to tattoo certain clients instead, you know, instead of each other. Like, I don't need to pit other tattooers against each other or say shit about somebody else who's tattooing, but there's clients who are shitty. And I wish I could be like, hey, don't tattoo that person because that person ghosted me, left me high and dry, or they didn't pay me for the session or whatever, you know. So I wish that was more of a thing, but, you know,
I've emailed shops. I've had really terrible clients who have like been like, fuck you, I'm going to, you know, blank tattoo shop. And then I've emailed that shop and I've been like, hey, look out for this person. And these other tattooers in these other shops don't respond to me. And it's like, that's fine, because if ultimately it's like, maybe that person learned their lesson by being a bad client with me, and maybe they'll like hold their tongue or behave themselves better or like be more understanding with like the next tattooer. And I always try to like, I always call it, you know, firing a client.
Yeah,
when like,
totally.
You know, when something doesn't work out or they become like too high maintenance, or, you know, there's just like some kind of like behavioral problematic issue.
And sometimes your relationship with a client goes on so long that you just grow out of each other and it becomes not good. You got to let it go. You know, even if they want to keep coming to you.
Yeah.
Sometimes that happens too.
I mean, I'm always content when people come back, but I'm booked so far out that, you know, even when clients want to come back to me, and I'm very particular about the type of projects that I take. So, you know, if like a client I used to do really small pieces on, you know, 5 to 10 years ago or something, they contact me again for a small piece, you know, then it's like I'll just defer that to the other people that work with me because I don't have time for it, you know?
Yeah.
So
you have a bunch of artists working for you trust. So
yeah, and I think part of being like a tattoo shop owner is like, you know, like you have the staff because you can't accommodate the amount of people that are inquiring. So, you know, the reason that I have other people working for me that have like a little bit better availability is so that I can pass them a lot of work.
And that's when, you know, you can have a shop, is when you have too much work.
Right. I don't know. It wasn't necessarily that way for my first shop. However, my first shop was more so that like, you know, I bought it from an acquaintance of mine. And it was more that I wanted to evolve my career in the way that I wanted to. And that got me to the point that I'm at today where I am so booked out. And even so, ended up buying this company from somebody else who also had put a lot of time and energy into developing this company.
To be clear, Hannah owns Old Crow Tattoo in Oakland.
Yeah, which was formerly owned by Philip Millick, and many, many wonderful Bay Area tattooers have worked there over the years. So yeah, it's kind of been like a staple of the area since, I believe, 2008. So like going back to like outgrowing clients, I think that sometimes there's just kind of like a natural progression as to like what people want or don't want. And I also have clients who have come to me for a small tattoo 10 years ago and then contact me and now they want a sleeve and it's a decade later.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love about tattooing is I get to be a part of people's lives for so long. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'm tattooing them generationally as well. Like I've tattooed a family of grandma, mom, and daughter. Mm-hmm. And the daughters come to me a few times. And it's really lovely to like watch people grow up, you know, and like kind of become who they're going to be or just evolve over time. And that's why I'm still in the Bay, you know, after all these years. It's not necessarily that like the Bay Area is so incredibly wonderful, but like my clientele are, you know, and like having that like that community to kind of be a part of is really special. And I think, you know, when people think about tattooing, they miss that a little bit. But if you tattoo for a long time, you get to really be a part of people's lives. And when you think about like tattooing and medicine, like that's one of those really special things.
Yeah, I agree. I have that too. Clients that I've tattooed, you know, them, and then their kids turn 18, they come to me. Or their mom decides she wants to tattoo, they come to me. So, yeah, that's a really special thing about being a tattoo artist. I agree. You end up seeing kids grow up, and you end up seeing, you know, what evolves in their lives.
Yeah, just like being a part of people's lives.
Yeah. What if you weren't a tattoo artist? Like if that was something you couldn't do, just like it didn't exist. Mm-hmm. What would you do if you had 3 more lifetimes to fill with a career?
Oh, motorcycle mechanic, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
What else?
Oh, I gotta choose more.
Is that the only one? You're like, I'll do that for 3 more lifetimes. Would you have like a shop where you'll bring their bikes to? Like one of those?
Yeah, I think I would want to be like a specialty engineer to like work with a company to develop like a specialty parts and equipment for motorcycles. Like, I don't know, like just for example, like Nissan or Brembo, or maybe even like, yeah, just like a couple of different FMF, or, you know, just like different companies that do different specialized engineering systems, whether it's brakes or exhaust or whatever for motorcycles. So anyway, yeah, like engineering would say that, like engineering, or I don't know, like I'd say like broad spectrum engineering. Like I like motorcycles, but like maybe if I had 2 more lifetimes, I'd be a fucking physicist and like be a rocket scientist, or like something like that. I like building systems, and I think that's what attracted me to tattooing as well, is that it's not just the art, it's also like the engineering side of using the tools and figuring out how all of that works, and the chemistry. So yeah, I like the science.
Speaking of the science of it, you wrote a book. What tell me about the book.
I did. I wrote a book with a couple of doctors and scientists called The Science of Tattooing. And it's a material science book about chemistry, physiology, and physics in tattooing. And I wanted there to be credibility to the book. So basically, I worked closely with like really smart, specialized people to develop content. And then worked with about 12 people overall to actually compile the book, do scientific illustrations, editing, all of that kind of stuff. So it was a huge project. It's out there. You can find it on Amazon. Just search for The Science of Tattooing in books. It's on Kindle as
by
well.
Hannah Wolf.
Yeah, by Hannah Wolf. In hindsight, I probably should have put the technical writers as authors on the book. However, the content that was written and produced was like predominantly things that I had asked to be written. So it wasn't necessarily authored so much as technically written by the scientists and doctors that I hired. However, a lot of it was definitely like more of their ideas. Well, not a lot of it, but a good portion of like the writing was like their ideas that we collaborated with.
You outsourced a lot of it. That's fascinating to me because I dream of writing a book someday, not about tattooing, but in general. But so you outsourced a lot of the science part to other people.
Yeah, because I didn't want to write a science book because then I was just going to be challenged on it forever.
Then it would just not
being
move.
that I don't hold any specific accolades for, whatever college degrees, because apparently that's how everybody in society wants to rate your proficiency, whether you know things or not. It's like some document that you pay for a university. So yeah, I mean, I'm not saying these people don't know what they're talking about. They certainly do, and that's why I worked with them. But I think most scientific and medical textbooks are not written by one specific person. They're typically written by a group of people. I have a second cousin who's my mother's cousin, he's a neurosurgeon. And when I talked to him about doing this book just philosophically as an idea, he basically told me, well, you don't write it yourself. You find people to write each chapter. And I said, very interesting. And eventually that's what I ended up doing.
I feel like that's sort of the key to success in many ways, is smartly outsourcing tasks that you would get stuck on. And I don't think I've learned that in my life yet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Work smarter, not harder.
Yeah. Just outsource that if you can.
If you can.
If you can make that money elsewhere where you're better at, then you pay someone else to do that piece.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I have 2 managers at my shop, because it's not worth my time to do a lot of the things that I need them to do. So rather than spending all of my free time managing the shop or doing paperwork or social media posts or dealing with guest artists or, whatever, it's better for me to just hire somebody, and kind of pay them to do those tasks, because I can make more money doing what I do best, which is tattooing.
What makes the perfect client?
Someone who just like allows me to be creative and doesn't have a budget.
That's always nice.
Yeah, someone who like appreciates that like my skill set is valuable and that I deserve to be paid for my time, but also that like my skill set is valuable and I deserve to be creative based on like what they want also.
Are there tattoo styles that do you feel like you like what you like, or, making tattoos happen in styles that you already like and know and are familiar with? Or do you get obsessed with new things and look into new things, research into new things, and then want to try them out? Do you feel like you move through styles, or do you feel like you stick with what you... I don't know if that makes sense, that question.
Yeah, it totally does. I'm kind of a jack of all trades when it comes to tattooing, just because I've been doing it for so long. When you worked in street shops back in the day, if you wanted to make money, you kind of needed to do everything. Mm-hmm. And I always liked the challenge of if somebody came in and asked for a dragon, I could do a dragon and some kind of Japanese style, and definitely I put my own spin on it. If somebody came in for a portrait, I could do that. And if somebody came in for American traditional, I could do that. And I always liked being able to have that flexibility in my artistry and career. But when it comes to moving through styles, I just think that I've definitely wanted to master certain things, but a lot of my job depends on who's asking for what at what time, because everything that I do is commission based. So all the pieces that I tattoo on people, they have a pretty big role in what I'm tattooing. So I'm not really doing flash or pieces that I pre-draw. I work directly with the clients to develop their tattoo from point A to point Z.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like I have a little bit... I feel like people are pretty malleable, and so when someone comes in and they want something, maybe they don't know what style they want it in, I could say, oh, you have great skin for this, or you have an aesthetic that will fit this style, what do you think about this? And half the time they'll be like, yeah, do it. And so I feel like I get to experiment with specific people that mm-hmm. already know me and trust me. So I imagine that everybody else does the same thing.
Yeah, I think to a point, I definitely show people styles, and they kind of pick, yeah, I want that, or sometimes they'll just say, I want you to do it in your style, and then I'll get weird with it and end up with a bunch of chopped and screwed tattoos. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of happy to work with people. That's the reason I tattoo. It's not as much for the art as it is for the people. For me, my ego is not necessarily fulfilled by the artistry anymore. For me, it's much more of building connections with human beings and making them happy. That
because you've kind of done the artistry.
I've done it, been there, done that.
Are there things that not people, but specifically things, if somebody comes to you and they say, I want this thing, are there things you will say no to? Besides the obvious, the hate symbols and such. Yeah,
obviously no. Nothing that's offensive. But if it's something I don't think will age very well, I'll try to talk them out of it.
What about something you've done a ton of, you probably have done a ton of hummingbirds? Or
I'll do some hummingbirds.
Some hummingbirds.
Oh yeah.
I get so tired of them sometimes.
I love doing butterflies and I don't care.
How about golden poppies?
I'll do all that stuff. Yeah.
You'll do all of it.
All of it. I don't care.
You'll find a new way to do it. That's interesting to you.
Exactly. And a lot of it's a game time decision too. If they're whatever, make it pretty. that day that they come in, I'll decide what line weight I'm going to use, what my color palette is. Mm-hmm. And so I don't do a lot of pre-design with tattoos. I'll do a basic sketch. And then when I do the tattoo, that's the first time, I don't know how the tattoo is going to look until it's done. I really don't. And my clients don't either, so we're kind of just discovering it.
You're trusting each other. They trust you, and you trust them, and
I can see it in my head. But the fun for me is just kind of seeing it become what it's going to become.
Yeah, I work very similarly to that. Are you planning on writing any more books?
Possibly. I would like to do a second edition of The Science of Tattooing that has more to do with wound healing. The physiology of how the body heals wounds, and kind of do a little bit more of a physiological in-depth book, as well as something that's a little bit more comprehensive to bloodborne pathogen. My feeling with the first book was an assumption that everybody already had their bloodborne pathogen certificate while reading that book, but I think that there's a much larger interest, not only internationally, but outside of the tattoo industry, for people who don't have any basis. So I think if I do a second edition, it'll be more comprehensive into basic concepts that most experienced tattooers already know, and then also concepts that are much more in depth.
Your book is for tattoo artists or for everybody?
When I wrote the book, it's predominantly for tattooers, yes.
And the second book you want to write, or the second edition of it, is that going to be more for everybody or also for primarily tattoo artists?
Both. Mm-hmm. So it would have more comprehensive subjects, like it would basically just have a chapter on cross-contamination and like bacterial infections. Because the book dabbles a little bit into that, but it's more so for people that already have a basis knowledge of basic tattooing and infection, who already know about staph, who already know about these different things that can happen. If I do a second edition, that would be a chapter that tattooers who already have that knowledge and understanding can basically just skip and move on to the next thing. Whereas people that are just starting out in the industry or people who are not in the industry would find that really valuable.
I think this book is interesting to everybody.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely interesting to everybody. But there's definitely some like elementary concepts, like some fundamentals that the book kind of glosses over for somebody who's not a tattoo professional.
There's so few resources available, I think, to starting tattoo artists. There's still such a gap, in knowledge being put out there.
I mean, there are resources available. Whether they're good resources, that's debatable. And I have some pretty mixed reviews on my book. A lot of people wanted more in-depth coverage as to like what's in tattoo pigments. The problem is that there's so little regulation there's becoming more regulation, but when I did the book, I also started compiling material safety data sheets, and I compiled thousands of them, and I was going to make a database with these data sheets so you could actually search as to like what is in a specific pigment based on the companies manufacturing the pigments. The problem is that as I was doing that, the European Union was starting to crack down on what could be used in the pigments, and the US federal government is likely to follow suit at some point. So it seemed kind of like superfluous to like make this huge database and spend all this money with like data entry and programmers when half of the pigments are not going to be able to be like manufactured and produced and sold in the next couple of years here. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm just kind of waiting until that kind of fizzles out. But again, it's like there's kind of like general concepts in my book that are not super in depth because I didn't have all the time and money in the world to get into that. And people were a little upset that I didn't. It's like they wanted all of the answers from reading my book, but really all that I can do is give them a fundamental understanding for them to then maybe go out and ask some questions or request material safety data sheets themselves for certain types of pigments that they're using. So yeah, it's a tool. It's not a solution.
You're a shop owner and a tattoo artist. You're not a researcher. Like that's not your full-time job.
No.
It's kind of like, a favor that you did to us.
Right.
To have this book out there.
Yeah. I always refer to it as like my love letter to the tattoo industry. Because I certainly like don't make like any money off of it. And it was something I paid for out of pocket, just like to be kind, and eventually I want it to be a nonprofit that can get grants to do research, but it's just finding the right people to work with it. And because it has been my baby and I do get to like decipher and control like where it goes right now, I'm a little protective as to like who comes on board because I have put so much work into it. But eventually it will be a nonprofit and move into like research and education. It's just a matter of like finding the right people and finding the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really it's one of those sort of blind spots that we have in the industry, that the inks I buy to put inside the skin of my clients I trust because they've been around a long time. I pay a lot of money for them, and so you're like, well, if it costs $20 a little bottle, it must be good. That's not necessarily true, but It's stood the test of time. You know, these chemists, these people have been putting out the ink and it's been okay. People haven't been having reactions. But you know what I mean? Like, okay, now that we have an expiration date.
But it hasn't
new.
like, it hasn't stood the test of time. That's the problem. And it hasn't not had reactions. That's kind of the problem with it. And that's why these governments are starting to get involved, is because there's been very little accountability as to like what these manufacturers are putting in their ink, because a lot of the manufacturers don't actually know. They're just buying raw powder pigment, and then they're assuming that the chemical content of the raw powder pigment is what the manufacturer says, but the manufacturer who's selling the raw pigment doesn't have a lot of accountability to make sure that the chemical content is exactly what it should be for what the pigment company is like labeling on the pigment and then selling to the public, because the liability therein lies in the pigment company. And then it's kind of like a gray area if the liability is also in the practitioner who's like, you know, injecting it into a person's epidermis is also at fault. So there's some gray areas that tattooing is going to be moving into, and you're kind of like not safe in any regard with the tattoo pigment. There's always a potential of complication, but it's just like anything else in your life. And right. I think that that's why you fill out that release form, is that if you're an adult and you understand that there could be risks involved in it, it's going to be your decision at the end of the day. Just like wearing deodorant that has like aluminum sulfides in it, just like smoking a cigarette, just like drinking alcohol. It's like,
literally walking down the street. You know,
yeah, using your cell phone. Like, we know,
right.
Getting in your car every day, like, we know that there are inherent risks in a lot of our day-to-day activities. So I think as long as the education is passed down onto the public and consumer as to like what's happening to them and what's going into them, I think that's where like things become appropriate. What's inappropriate in the industry right now, in my opinion, is that people don't know, and there is a deficit in the understanding and education of the material science behind it. And it's not consensual that somebody may have a certain percentage of mercury tattooed into their body, and we don't know what the long-term effects of that are. So as long as the public, like on my release form, at Old Crow Tattoo, we have like a section where somebody has to agree that like there are potential and inherent risks in tattoo pigments, and it's not regulated by the FDA. So as long as people understand that like as a practitioner, I'm not 100% sure like what's in this pigment, because I don't even know if the manufacturer is 100% sure what's in this pigment. Right. Because again, it goes back to the chemical manufacturer, and I'm not even sure they know. So when you batch test like percentages of heavy metals and stuff, like a big issue that we're having both in the United States and overseas is that the chemical composition and the heavy metal components can be at a different percentage than what something is marketed at. And, you know, it's just kind of a supply chain issue therein. But then again, it's like, as an adult, like, do you want your red to last for 20 years and maybe be harmful? Or do you want your red to fade in 5 years and be a little bit safer? So that's kind of where we're at with like, you know.
Are there specific brands that you trust more?
Like any manufacturer that manufactures and sells both in the United States and Europe is probably adhering to a little bit of a higher standard.
So who would that be?
The big international brands are like World Famous, Solid, Intense, Fusion, Eternal. I'm sure there's a couple of other.
Dynamic, one of those.
I think Dynamic is selling overseas as well, although I'm not a big fan of a lot of Dynamic colors because they tend to be somewhat photoreactive.
What do you mean by that?
And, well, it means basically that once they encounter like UV radiation, so that would be like light from the sun, that sometimes people will have like reactivity to them. There was also quite a few batches of Dynamic Black a couple years ago that the FDA released a warning about. They didn't do a recall, but they did a public warning asking the manufacturer, which was Dynamic, to do a recall on their pigments, which they didn't, because there was found to be like a high level of bacteria in those batches. So basically they just weren't sterilized correctly. So the manufacturer did not do a recall. However, a lot of the distributors did. So a lot of the tattoo supply companies like sent out messages and notices that like certain batches of Dynamic were to be recalled. I personally use Dynamic Black pretty often. I think it's a great pigment. I just wish that like the standard of operation for these manufacturers was stepped up a little bit more, so that, you know, they use like a greater standardization of sterilization and safety and consistently through their manufacturing practices, so that the public isn't the one who like has to be at fault should something like this happen. Just like, you know, like someone who grows and sells spinach, you know, and then they have an E. coli outbreak because they used bags of like fertilizer that was contaminated, you know, just stuff like that. Like you just wish people would have a higher standard of practice. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, we do this every day, and we have the same pigments in our own skin, and we generally consider to be fairly safe. And all of these things are organic, meaning they're variable, and they're made by humans, and humans make errors.
So that's actually not what organic means. Organic means that it's a carbon compound. Mm-hmm. So it means that it's a carbon-based chain. So organic pigments just mean that it's a carbon-based pigment. It has nothing to do with... I didn't mean like organic, like tomatoes, organic versus not organic. Organic as in living, like a living... Right, it's carbon-based.
Yes, that's what I meant. Yeah, I didn't mean to say that the pigments are organic in a way of like organic products that we ingest as food. Yeah,
it's not like USDA organic.
More like bio, like what they say in Europe, you know. Like bio is what they mean by like living in natural.
In chemistry... organic just means a carbon-based molecule. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so that's what it means in tattooing pigment chemistry as well.
That's what I was just was thinking about when you were talking about all of this. Is I was thinking about why, you know, when you see tattoo artists that don't have any tattoos, why that bugs me. And I think that, you know, as you were talking, I realized that why it bugs me is less to do with like, well, do they really love the art if they're not participating in it for themselves? But it's about, you know, you're taking that risk, I'm taking that risk. Yeah. I'm doing it with you.
I agree. I don't really think it's fair for tattooers to not have tattoos. I feel like if you're going to put somebody through that experience, through the pain and like putting these particles underneath their skin, like you should at least have enough respect for the craft to have it on yourself too. Because if you don't believe in it, then you're just somebody who's trying to take somebody else's money for a service.
Right. It feels like more exploitative.
Yeah, it's very exploitive. I think that, you know, going back to like that old school mentality, it's just kind of the way I was raised in the industry, is that you kind of have to earn and deserve tattooing. It's not for everybody. It's not something that like people should be entitled to. It's something that they have to earn.
I was thinking about that. I was going to ask you, now, you know, I go on Instagram and of course I'm targeted with ads for different tattoo related things, including things like Mad Rabbit that makes a numbing cream or other sorts of numbing creams out there, and people being like, oh my God, I didn't feel a thing. What do you think about numbing creams? What do you think about that as a standard as opposed to an exception?
As a standard, I do a lot of really long sessions on people and it wears off really quickly. And when the pain sets back in, like when the numbing cream wears off, it's like tenfold what people feel. So I find that people sit less well, less long. When I use that, what I do in my practice is I basically start my tattoo and get to a point where I can use Bactine and the Bactine's not going to dissolve my stencil. Mm-hmm. So for the first couple hours of the tattoo, my clients, they kind of have to sit through it and just bear through it, unfortunately. And I think, if you can find someone who's willing to pay the money, and if you can find some kind of like plastic surgery clinic who will put you under for a couple of hours through like general anesthetic, that's cool and all, but like there's no pain-free way to do it. When you wake back up, you're still going to have like this painful spot on your body. So I don't think tattoos like should be excruciating to people, but if you're not ready to like sit through an uncomfortable experience, then like maybe just don't get a tattoo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's part of the experience, I think.
Yeah.
There's what you said about earning it. There's something to that.
Yeah, and it is.
It's not for everybody.
It's not for everybody, but it's also like a cathartic healing event where people can use that pain to basically let go of something that's really bothering them. Like they can focus on some kind of emotional pain and put that into their physical pain, and in a lot of ways like let it go. So I think that there's this interesting phenomenon of being human and feeling pain. It's the same reason, in my opinion, is like why people run marathons, you know? It's like you get like an endorphin dump and you feel like you've accomplished something, and it's uncomfortable and it's difficult and it's really hard, and you get through it, and when you get through it you're like, fuck yeah, I did it.
One of the last questions I'll ask you is like, what is your perfect rest? You tattoo many hours a week, your body hurts. What do you do on your day off? What's a perfect rest day?
I'm a crazy person. My days off are like skiing and like racing motorcycles and like working on bikes. I'm just a busybody.
You can't sit still, huh?
I'm not somebody who like sits and does nothing unless I'm really not feeling well. So yeah, I like to get stuff done. I like to do things. I like to be out in nature. My rest days are like riding a dirt bike up a mountain.
What about your body maintenance? What are there practices you do? Do you do yoga? Do you roll out? Do you get massages? Is there something you do to maintain?
I do. I stay pretty physically active. I think being a long-term tattooer, it's incredibly important to maintain your physical health. You can't be sedentary. Sleeping all day is not going to be a solution for your back problems. What is going to be a solution to your back problems is going to the gym. I do believe in chiropractic work. I do believe in massage. I do believe in stretching. And I think a combination of all those things can keep somebody like really happy and healthy throughout their career.
Give me a couple things, little things that have made you happy lately. Is there like a book or show or maybe just the weather?
Yeah, I do like the rain. Definitely like sleeping in the rain is great. Yeah. Oh, today there's some kind of like winterberry tree by my door, and this is the time of year where like all the berries are super red, and then the rain comes and the leaves are super green, and then all the deer come and eat the berries.
Sounds lovely.
I know, this is a beautiful time of year.
It's making you happy to look at that.
Yeah, it's like the rain season in the Bay Area is like the rebirth and regeneration after everything's like dried out and dead and on fire, and now everything's like renewed.
Fresh and juicy. Mm-hmm. Do you have any parting words for the very end of our episode of Ink Medicine?
Don't live your life in fear.
Right on. Thank you so much, Hannah.
Anytime.